I just got back from a ride. I'm standing in my garage, staring at my bikes, and the whole time I was out on the road, I was thinking, what is it on this bike or any of my other bikes that just doesn't live up to my expectations? What is it that I could make better? That's the same thing my guest on this, the first ever Build Cycle podcast, was thinking in the midst of a 100-mile mountain bike ride. Marc Basiliere is the founder of Lindarets, a small component brand that's come up with a number of better mousetraps for riders looking to tweak their mountain bikes for better performance, or just better functionality. We talk about how he went from writing in-depth reviews of others' products to designing his own, how he got them manufactured and brought to market, and some of the things anyone thinking of making small parts needs to consider before going to production. Let's get rolling.
Welcome to the Build Cycle, the podcast by Tyler Benedict that explores the startup stories and growth tactics of hundreds of entrepreneurs, plus his own tips and tricks learned over 2 decades of launching, running, and growing businesses, including BikeRumor.com, the world's largest and most popular cycling tech blog. If you're thinking of starting your own business, the Build Cycle will give you the tools and inspiration to do it right. Now, let's dive into this episode of The Build Cycle.
So Marc, I've first met you via email, really, because you had your own website called Bike Fix, and I think at the time you were just sort of kind of over having to keep it updated and manage a website, but you still really like to write about bikes, mainly reviewing products. And you reached out to me asking if you could write for Bike Rumor. I dragged my feet for a long time until you threatened to offer somebody else your writing, and then finally got you on board. But tell me a little bit, how did you get to start your own website, and what were you doing before that?
The Bike Fix was born out of a number of conversations I had with a fellow rider, and we were, I'd say, we were looking for something different than was available in a lot of the cycling press at the time. More in-depth reviews based on longer days. And that's something that, cycling has a lot of niches, and we felt like we weren't getting the insight we needed to make good gear purchases. And my partner at the time, partner in the project, Charlie, and I were looking for fairly specific, in-depth information. And, in print, certainly there wasn't the room for the sort of depth that we were looking for and the details we were looking for. And Bike Fix was kind of a fun project to try and provide that information to folks who had similar preferences and ideas. It was never meant to be a commercial project. Like a lot of blogs were early on, it was a reflection of our preferences, and I found a small audience, and like you say, the mechanics, the day-to-day running of the site weren't really my personal focus, and we certainly didn't have enough content to draw a lot of traffic.
Were you tracking traffic? Like how many visitors you had?
We were, and to be honest, I don't remember how many unique visits or anything like that. I'm sure I could dig through and pull it up, but it wasn't like advertising was a big revenue generator. It was more just staying involved in the industry in a way, and it was a fun project, but it wasn't something that was self-sustaining by any means.
And I should know this, but what year was that you contacted us, and what year did you start writing for Bike Rumor?
Oh gosh,
it's been a while now.
It has. It's been a while. I would say It's been 7 or 8 years now.
Okay. And then just personal curiosity, the ads, were you just running like Google ads, or were you guys selling direct on that?
There were a couple of affiliate programs. This was, I don't know if you remember Steep and Cheap, but that was definitely the income generator for us, because they were paying probably an unwisely high bounty for new customers. So anybody who placed their first order through Steep and Cheap, I think we got like $5, wow, which is huge. That's insane numbers right now, and obviously they couldn't keep that up.
Yeah, there's some affiliates we use that have actually knocked back how much they're paying, just because I guess they couldn't afford the original rates they offered. So,
well, and it's one of those things where you can't, your cost to acquire a customer can't be that high.
Right.
That's just, no business can really support that unless they're selling fairly high margin or big dollar items. So that didn't last for sure.
Well, real quick, I have more questions about BikeFix, but before that, why you were doing that? You had a full-time job, right?
Yeah. So I, at the time, I was working for the Department of Energy, doing mechanical design and project management. Ultimately, probably at the time, more mechanical and engineering design. There's a fairly large DOE lab here.
Which is where you're in Albuquerque?
I'm in Albuquerque. Yep. So ended up here about 12 years ago, and quickly landed a job there, and so I was doing that full time, and writing for Bike Rumor on the side.
And you said you're a project manager, right? What's your educational background?
So by the time I finished at the lab, I was a project manager and in fact a process development sort of specialist, I guess. An engineering program project lead was my title. But I started out going way back. Actually, in high school, I had a good vocational program where I ended up doing a lot of board drafting, it was at the tail end of actually using a pencil and a drafting board. And we did a little bit of CAD back then in the early to mid 90s, and came out of that with some basic skills, which got me my first design job. And I was doing that through high school for a valve company. When it came time to choose a major, as a lot of 18-year-olds do, I was looking for something fun and interesting. And against my better judgment, pursued a degree in experiential education in adventure-based program management in Vermont, which if you think about a Knowles program or any of those kind of experiential educational programs, be it a backcountry trip with an outdoor leadership program or ropes courses, team building with corporate groups and kids. That's the sort of thing we focused on, the execution and management of those programs. And it was a great time. It was a lot of fun. And it was, after 3 years, had more or less finished my major requirements and realized that I honestly, it wasn't where my passion lie. So went to the UK for my final semester and studied design in Nottingham, England. But came back with that project or the adventure-based program management degree, and ended up interning and subsequently becoming the executive director of Kingdom Trails, which is a trail network in northeastern Vermont. It's pretty well known in the Northeast, and it was I guess it was a year ago that Bike held their Bible of Bike tests up there. So it's known throughout the Northeast, lots of natural flowing single track, and all on private land. So that was a good education.
What were you doing there specifically?
So it was a small organization. As the director, I was doing a lot of grant writing, some trail maintenance, a little bit of trail building, but partnering with IMBA to host, one of the early IMBA epics up there. We were writing grants to the state and to companies like Power Bar actually supported us early on. And
were you into cycling? Is that why you chose that one, or was it just a good business opportunity? Okay.
No, it was great. I was into mountain biking. I'd been riding since the late '80s, which doesn't feel like that long ago. But
until you say it out loud.
Until you do the math. So I've been mountain biking since my early teens, since the late '80s, and fell into this great trail network, 100 miles of single track in northeastern Vermont, and ended up working with them for about a year until it was time to go back to school and pursue design, which I went back to the UK for, and spent a couple of years over there studying product design, or design for use, which is, if you think of anything, the Mac is the obvious example that a lot of people toss out, but everything from toasters to chairs are designed, whether or not they are manufacturable and meet their users and manufacturers' needs. There's a lot that goes into that.
Yeah.
And that's something that had fascinated me for a very long time. So I went for graduate school, went to Nottingham Trent University, which I believe is no longer, has changed names since. Studied design for use, and got my design background there. So between that and my program management, I ultimately ended up working with the DOE, doing design and program management work there.
What did you design for them, for the DOE?
I was in a department that focused on energetics, so small explosions.
So you got to design small explosions.
I learned to keep my hands in my pockets whenever I was on the shop floor of the factory floor. Static electricity is not your friend. And but in all seriousness, it was, if you think of an airbag initiator, a lot of devices sort of in that scale.
Okay.
Using gases to perform action. And dealing with suppliers, working with suppliers all over the country to deliver product to a very, very high standard, extremely high reliability standards, extremely high standards for documentation. Working with them to deliver those to our customer, within the government. And that was just a huge ongoing education. It's fantastic. As far as learning how things get built, having as a young designer, having discussions with experienced manufacturers and machinists who had no problem calling you a dumbass for specifying unnecessarily tight tolerances or parts that couldn't be built economically, if at all.
Huh.
And yeah, that was good times. I mean, it's a very big organization. We had, I want to say the site where I was had 11,000 employees. So there's a lot of overhead associated with that. And
I imagine a lot of bureaucracy too.
Oh, absolutely. The budgeting process, it teaches you to work within a certain environment that any large organization has.
What was the coolest project that you personally worked on there? What was the coolest thing you got to design?
Oh, I don't know if I can talk about them really. There were a lot of really clever people, and despite the government's reputation as being high budget all the time. There were a lot of really clever ways to get answers on a shoestring, perform experiments and use off the shelf materials to make things economically. And that's what I'm most proud of, for a lot of the test setups and the experiments done in the back, where we figured out how to do things for relatively small money. And that's using the McMaster car catalog, which for those who don't know is about a 5-inch thick 8x10 catalog of anything you would need for a factory. But yeah, there's a lot of really bright people there.
Cool. And so we're going to fast forward slightly. You were doing that. You had your website. You started writing for Bike Rumor. And then, to my own discredit, you switched over to writing for Singletrack UK for a little while because I was too slow to pay. So let that be a lesson to everybody. Pay your freelancers and employees on time, and they will stay with you longer. But so you wrote for Chips and those guys at Singletrack for a while. And then sort of, if I remember right, you kind of phased yourself out of that so that you could focus on your startup, which is Lindarets. And I remember when you first pitched that to us or mentioned it, it was socks. You were going to do really good riding socks. And I don't think you've ever actually made socks, have you?
I have a bucket of socks here. Some of which are mine, some of which, a lot of which are other people's. Yes, yeah. I knew after about a decade with the DOE that it was time to do something different. And to my then girlfriend, now wife's credit, she was extremely supportive of my finding something that I was excited to do. And I felt like there were some opportunities in the bike market. I wanted to do something domestically sourced at a reasonable price that was good. And Bike Rumor readers may recall, and I don't really encourage them to go back, but there were a lot of sock reviews under my byline, and there weren't that many great ones. There are a lot of very good socks, but there are also a lot of pretty bad ones that continue to sell beyond my belief.
What is it? What is it about a sock that you wanted that wasn't available?
I want never to think about my socks. So one of my kind of guiding principles as a designer has been that if you have a product, you shouldn't think about it. I want it to disappear into the background. And, maybe it's just my sensitive feet or some other pathology, but there's always a seam or some bunching or material isn't wicking properly. There are a lot of just minor annoyances with socks, and I went so far as to actually go to a week-long sock school in North Carolina to learn the ins and outs of sock design and how to achieve my goals and make some industry contacts, and had several rounds of prototypes made, and ultimately got distracted. We did a couple of, or we being the Royal, we did some t-shirts, some Rocks Belong t-shirts at Interbike a few years ago. I want to say 2014.
I remember.
And those ended up selling really well. So we had an advertisement, but no real product line. And around the same time, I was in talks with Wolf Tooth Components. They had some extremely popular cassette range extenders where they were taking 10-speed Shimano drivetrains, and SRAM for that matter, from 11 to 36 to 11 to 42.
And let me just, because there's going to be some non-cyclists listening to this. So Wolf Tooth Components is the brand that makes kind of accessory parts to put onto existing drivetrains and bikes. And a cassette is the cluster of gears at the back. And what's becoming more and more popular are these wide range cassettes where you have a much broader range of gearing, so you can go from a tiny gear at the bottom to go fast to a huge gear at the top to go slow but really easy up the climbs. And so these extenders and aftermarket kits that Wolftooth and others are making simply swap out some of the gears at the top end of that to go from big to bigger, kind of giving you more range without having to buy a whole new drivetrain. And so, and what was the first part that you helped design for them?
So part of what I saw with the range extenders and the idea of reducing the front chain ring. So you have range comes from two places: the chain rings, which are attached to the pedals, and the cassette, which is attached to the rear wheel. People at the time, inspired to a large extent by SRAM, a major component manufacturer's release of a group called XX1, were looking to simplify their drivetrains and only have one chain ring attached to the cranks and a wide range in the rear, the cassette. Wolftooth had some proprietary tooth profiles that worked very well at holding the chain on a single chain ring. Their drop stop chain rings. And as a companion piece, had released some wide range cassette extenders that we just mentioned. The issue with those was that to get the derailleur, which moves the chain across that cassette, to clear the larger cog, some adjustments needed to be made that negatively impacted shifting, especially at the opposite end of the cassette in the high gears. So there was very little chain engagement.
Because the quick fix was just to max out that B screw and try and push the top pulley on the derailleur down further, right?
Exactly. So that what that did was that moved the derailleur away from the cassette and also reduced the chain engagement. And those two things had to combined together had the effect of increasing drivetrain wear, especially for people in flatter areas who spend a lot of time in their high gears, because only 2-4 teeth were transmitting the rider's force, their power at any given time. And also because the chain has some lateral flex in it, it would make shifting vague at the bottom of the cassette. So what I came up with and licensed to Wolftooth was an adapter that actually moved the derailleur and was able to optimize around the extended cassette range. And that involved building a mental and subsequently a CAD model of the drivetrain and running optimizations that found the spot that would involve the least compromise.
Okay, and with I've got a million questions. Before you get further on the story of them making it, how did you come up with that idea? Were you sitting there staring at it thinking, all right, something's wrong, and now I got to figure out what, and then I got to figure out how to fix it?
So we have here in New Mexico, as in a few other states, Colorado and Arizona, I know of because they're nearby. We have what's called the New Mexico Endurance Series, and it's a series of not races limited to however many riders doesn't require a permit on the public lands on which they're held, but they're generally 60 to 100 mile mountain bike events. And there's one out here called the San Isidro Dirty Century, which is a lot of dirt roads out in the desert. And of course you have a lot of time to think on these events. And I was following a young racer who had one of these extended range cassettes on his bike. And I could see when we were trucking along at 20-25 miles per hour, he had virtually no chain engagement. His derailleur was backed way off the cassette, and not only did it instinctively look wrong, but the more time I sat on his wheel kind of focusing on it, the more I realized that could be addressed. And I came back and did some experimenting and had some prototypes cut, and sure enough, it was possible to relocate the derailleur and optimize the derailleur's location.
And where did you do that? The
Using a
prototypes?
fairly
Like
straightforward adapter.
how did you find somebody to cut prototypes for you?
I had experience with a company called Proto Labs from my time at the DOE, and they did the first prototypes for Lindarets, CNC machined out of aluminum. It's pretty straightforward. You build a CAD model and upload a model, as well as I don't think they do a print. They just work off the CAD model, so you can't specify tolerances very easily with them. But they have an automated system, and they'll make whatever you need, from CNC machined aluminum, steel, plastics, to actually making injection molds for short run products. So they want this doodad, and upload it into their system, and I'll give you a price and a lead time.
Could you tell me, like, what does it cost to produce a prototype of a small part? Because we're talking about a part that's like, I'm trying to think of an example, not much bigger than a stack of 10 quarters.
Right. It's probably, let's see, those original goat lengths were 2 inches by 1 inch by about 3/8 of an inch. And they had a pressed in pin. Prototyping on that, I'd say probably about $75 each.
Okay. How many did you get made?
I'd do 2 or 3 at a time and iterate as quickly as possible.
Right.
What's that?
Yeah, I was going to say, and you just make some tweaks. Test them again.
Yeah. Sorry, I thought you said 6 weeks. And the turnaround's usually around 2 weeks.
How many iterations did you go through until you were happy with it?
Oh gosh, I bet I could tell you. Because one of the things I learned is revision at the DOE is revision control is hugely important. Let's see.
So what do you mean by revision control? Like just only change one thing at a time, or?
Exactly. Yeah. Okay. Change one thing at a time and label everything. Keep the models. Whenever we do 3D printed parts, which is another approach, those always I extrude a cut. I make sure that the revision number is printed into the part. So it's indelible, it's there, and you know what you're testing at any given time. There were probably a half dozen revisions of the original goat length before it was ready to go. And then we've subsequently done a couple of running changes to the product in the past, 3 years, to simplify manufacturing, make it lighter, that sort of thing.
So you have this product, you've designed it. Did you then take that and approach Wolftooth about licensing it and making it for you, or had you already had that conversation?
No, I brought it to them. It's a lot easier to sell someone on a product if you have something rather than an idea, and being able to present something concrete, something physical.
Was that always the plan, or did you think, maybe I'll make these myself, run a batch, or did you always think I'm just going to design this and go somewhere and have somebody make it for me?
I was never planning on bringing a machine shop in-house. The capital costs for a good CNC machine are far too high for a product like that. But there are literally thousands of machine shops in the U.S. and probably millions worldwide who do contract work, and that's their bread and butter.
So what was why did you make the decision to let another cycling brand license it versus contract a machine shop to make them and sell them directly yourself?
It was a good fit for their product. It addressed an issue that they were hoping to solve as well, and it was turnkey. So Wolftooth was a good fit. There are a number of product companies making cassette extenders. Wolftooth for me was a good fit because one of my goals with Lindaret was to do as much in the U.S., if not in the first world, if not the U.S., as possible. And we've stuck with that. And Wolftooth do the same. You know, despite being, you know, maybe competitive with to slightly higher price than a lot of their competitors, almost everything in that catalog, the Wolftooth catalog, is CNC machined in Minnesota, if not Minnesota, you know, elsewhere in the U.S. And that's something that, you know, as a beneficiary of a first world education, of first world labor laws and environmental laws, I felt was important. I thought that if we could do things at a reasonable price, with all the worker benefits and the safety precautions and environmental protections that entailed, I would sleep better at night. And that's something that we don't fly the flag too hard. I know that's can be a little bit off-putting, but it's something that I felt was important, and really am working hard to maintain. And we found that the price differential, especially when you take into account the time you spend managing overseas suppliers, really isn't that great. And whatever impacts to our respective bottom lines, it feels good to us and feels like the right thing to do. So we were on the same page there, and they had the manufacturing capability to make them cost effectively. So, and the distribution to sell them. You know, for a while we co-branded the product, but ultimately it made more sense for Lindaret to license that product and the ones that came after it to Wolftooth Components,
right,
and on a royalty basis.
And distribution's key. I mean, I think people might underestimate that. If you can go from 0 to 100 with distribution, the bike shops, and an already existing customer base, then it's like pouring gas on a fire as opposed to trying to strike a fire with a flint and steel, you know?
Absolutely. And as a designer, my passion does not lie in making, you know, I love making things, but managing, doing supplier management and managing inventory, that sort of thing, really aren't what get me up every day.
Right. So you bring this idea, yeah, no, I get it. There's a lot of stuff with bike rumor that, you know, I do out of necessity, and certainly not what I'd rather be doing, but you got to do it to a point, and then, like, if you can outsource it.
Absolutely.
So you bring this idea to Wolftooth. They obviously liked it because they did it. What was the negotiation process as far as, you know, tell me what you want about financials, but like what makes sense from a licensing standpoint with a product like that?
Well, the arrangement that we landed on, and that's been the model for other agreements that I've had, is it varies depending on, you know, if I as a designer were to bring a company a product that they felt was a good fit, and it was fully formed, you know, turnkey, ready to go, with you know, a few small changes, but for the most part, you know, something that they could plug in and was a good fit with their catalog. All those development costs I've already borne, and that reflects my investment in the program. And then typically, you know, designs can be bought outright, or my preference is, you know what, for every unit you sell, Lindaret gets X dollars or X cents, and we catch up every month. And that's a low risk approach for the licensee.
And how
That
do you
way
track
they're not-
that? Do they share the books with you, or do you get a sales report from a third party? I mean,
we
obviously
don't-
there's some trust involved, but
Right, right. And in our contracts, we have the right to request a third party audit, but it's not. A lot of it is, and this may ultimately be may at some point prove to be a problem, but finding the right partners with whom you have a rapport and trust. I don't worry too much about that unless the numbers seem way off. So it's self-reported
Right.
on their part.
And now, do you have a patent on the design? What's preventing them from, or anybody else, from just knocking off the design and running with it without paying you?
On a number of our designs, we have design patents and utility patents. And those are marked as such. The patent process is long and expensive, and for a product like the GoatLink, it's not worth spending the money to hire a lawyer and the thousands of dollars and the time you'd wait. We patent things that have a long expected life and a very big market. So there are a couple of products, wolf tooth Lindarets products, that we've chosen to that we've shared development on, that we've chosen to patent, and that are patent pending now, if they haven't already been received. Things like the eccentric upper pulley on the wolf cage, which is another adapter, a drivetrain adapter. The way we figured out how to offset a pulley without requiring the user to dig into a derailleur's clutch to really get into it. We have a 5-minute install if you take your time. That's something that's patented. The RoadLink is patented, has a design patent on it, for in process, because it's a subjective decision, to be honest. I can't say there's a formula for what you patent and what you don't.
Right. Well, you bring up an interesting point with the GoatLink, and that depending on what you patent, that life cycle has something to do with it. And the GoatLink is almost one of those things in my mind that has a kind of a limited life cycle, because it's probably not going to be too much longer before people aren't needing to upgrade their cassettes. I mean, I'd say a couple more years, and most people that are riding are going to have either completely new drivetrains or new bikes that come with a proper, completely integrated wide range 1x drivetrain. So this product is almost like a stopgap.
Right. And by the time somebody else were to bring a competing product to market, and to be honest, I've seen at least 2 knockoffs of the GoatLink, one out of China, which is not a huge surprise, and then
didn't they put your logo on it too?
No, not the Chinese. Israel.
Oh.
They stole our copy as well as the design. So all the text that I had written, the catalog copy, was used on their website. And
it's just shameless.
That's transparent. That's straight up shameless. And they were shameless when I approached them about it. They're like, well, you got some free advertising out of it. And it's like, you know what, guys? Whatever. That's not a long-term business strategy.
Yeah. How did you deal with that?
We've publicized it a little bit. They don't have U.S. distribution. And it's such a blatant knockoff that, whatever. If they make a few hundred of them or 1,000 of them in Israel and nearby countries, then I'm sure they sleep fine. I haven't stolen the design, but it is what it is.
All right.
You've got to pick your battles and the things to be upset about. and it's not materially impacting me. And it's a little bit of it lends a little bit of credibility. The same is true of the Boostinator, which we didn't patent, but when Bill Shook came out with a similar concept, one of the founder of American Classic, he's a thinker. I love my conversations with him because he's physically in the idea. You can see it when you talk to him. And for somebody like him to come out with a similar product, through parallel evolution, that feels like validation.
Yeah, I was just going to say, sort of validates your own idea and creativity, which is nice. Because, Bill's come up with some good stuff over the years.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, he's got a unique perspective, but there's no arguing that he's an extremely bright guy who thinks things through. And, so anyway, the knockoff, it's a problem, but it's not a major problem.
So how many products have you worked with Wolftooth now?
Oh, gosh. So, let's see here. Products that are on the market about, I guess, early this spring, April, May. They took over the entire Lindarets catalog at the time. So we have, I think we've got 9 or 10 products on the market at the moment.
And at this point, are you almost just like a design consultant for them, or an outside designer?
Yeah, so our relationship has evolved. And as of the first of this year, Lindarets contracts were basically on retainer for a certain number of hours each month. And that frees me up to work on products that are not originated here, that Lindarets hasn't originated, that I haven't originated, and gives them some flexibility to call in design support on things that they have in the back of their minds.
Now, some of these products that they make, there's got to be some engineering, like stress analysis, especially with the chain rings when you're applying these forces at different angles to them. So your area of expertise is more the design and use side. Do you have an engineering background, or how do you bring in engineering talent to supplement what you do?
So the 3 principals at Wolftooth are all mechanical engineers.
Okay.
And that's where those are coming from. On products like the Boostinator, we'll hire or bring in outside engineers. There are a lot of very bright mountain biking or cycling mechanical engineers in the lab system. So there are a lot of PhD engineers on the trails that I see pretty regularly, and who are happy to do some analysis for a nominal fee. And that's worked out very well for us in the past. So having that talent pool to draw on, who know the market, who know the applications, has been really beneficial. Really beneficial.
Right on. So this path that you've taken, would you have ever predicted this, or it seems like the getting into the product side of things was not even a blip on your radar when you started out in adventure project management?
The design thing was always in the back of my head, and it's something that I've wanted to do for a long time. I think the gestation period was really long, and I think it was extremely valuable. The taking products from print or from concept or drawing to manufacturing and to product acceptance, a really difficult product acceptance process in the DOE was and learning how to do that well was a very big and valuable education.
What was it? Like, I feel like we're going to backtrack for a second here, but what was it that clicked inside your head? You said, you know what? I'm going to do this. Like, I think I can make a go of it. What gave you that confidence, or what just finally made you so fed up, or what was the trigger?
It goes back in some part to the reason that I started Bike Fix, that Charlie and I started Bike Fix, was we felt that needs weren't being met. And I continue to feel that way. There are areas of products that I feel could be improved. And as a product reviewer, both with Bike Rumor and later Singletrack, I'd be at the trade shows and see a lot of great products. There's a lot of inspiration in there, but also when you start to see patterns, there'd be opportunities as well.
Right.
And that's, maybe it's as simple as one person would do something one way and you'd do it another way. Part of it were, being frustrated by serviceability or ergonomic shortcomings. That's where the remote came from, and dealing with dropper post remotes, it just, you had to rerun internal routing every time you wanted to replace a cable, or just the installation process was brutal, because they'd put the cable fixing the screw that buried it inside the seat post. And under bar remotes that, relied on inline cable adjusters that would sit out in front of the bike and rattle because you've got weight just hanging on a cable. Those were all issues that I saw, and new releases would come out, and I have a pretty big news feed, including Bike Rumor and all the other major publications, where when something's released, I see it, and every once in a while you'd be like, they still haven't fixed that. Somebody should do something about that. And so that's when you start seeing those patterns. It's fine to look at a product and say, I would have done it differently. It's harder, but also more rewarding to say, well, okay, this is how I would do it, and then accept everybody else saying that they would have done it differently.
Right. And then
not.
Doing something about it.
And there's a lot of, the feedback. I try not to spend too much time listening to the peanut gallery, but it's incredibly difficult to bring a product to market at a price that people are willing to pay.
Right.
The raw material cost or the machining time are just a small portion of the cost and the challenges associated with making a product.
What are some of the other big ones that people may not be considering? Like, the point of this is kind of to share stories with would-be entrepreneurs that are thinking, this product, I can make it, but then they get into the mix of it and they're like, oh crap, I didn't think about this, and this. Like, what were some of the big surprises for you?
I think surprises, forecasting demand can be hugely challenging. Some things that I never would have expected to become big sellers are some of my, in terms of quantity, are just huge and continuous, ongoing sellers. Knowing how many of a product to make in your first production run, and balancing the realities, especially as a small business, of the capital required to make that happen. If you want to make 1,000 pieces of your idea and the product costs $10 each. Well, that's $10,000 if it's self-funded. Now, it doesn't sound like a lot of money, but if you're just getting started, do you want to spend $10,000 on buying 1,000 parts, or do you just buy 500 and a better computer so you can run the CAD software? Do you spend that on advertising or marketing related expenses? So how you carve up what money you have, especially if you're self-funded or a small company, that's really challenging. And I listened to and forgive me, I forget his name. The founder of Silka spoke recently about getting flack for going to Kickstarter for a couple of recent projects. Kickstarter is not made for established companies. But his point, which I've experienced, is if you don't have that capital, if you don't have large amounts of money to throw at multiple projects simultaneously, you can't release more than a couple of new ideas a year. So having, deciding what has the most potential and what needs to be released now rather than next year, because if we'd waited 2 years on the GoatLink, and focused resources on another product, like you say, it would have been obsolete before it landed. So that's figuring out the right balance between meeting demand and preserving your budget. That's challenging, and so I've been caught off guard several times by how many of X will need to keep in inventory, and I've also had boxes of other products that just kind of sit and look at me. So that's a big challenge. The expected challenges, a lot of them revolve around supplier management and delays and poor communications from suppliers, and I try to make it extremely clear when working with new suppliers that communication is critical. It's not uncommon, and it's unfortunate that, be it in the bike industry or the weapons industry, in the US or abroad, if you're not hearing from your suppliers, they're late. And the last thing I want to do is to promise a distributor or a customer that we will have something on February 14th and to call my supplier on the 10th and say, hey, where's these parts? And hear him or her say that, well, the machine's gone down and it'll be an extra 2 weeks. If I have a heads up, I can work around that. I can send emails to pre-order customers and say, hey, this has been delayed. I'd like to offer you a discount or keep you in the loop, give you the chance to cancel. I want to be upfront. But if I don't know, I can't do that. And that's been a really hard message to get through. It's not that I don't care if a supplier is late. I care if they hide the week that something's due. That causes problems for everybody, and that'll get somebody voted off the island very quickly.
Do you try to keep a rotation of suppliers for any particular part then to kind of reduce that risk, or you typically find one good one and stick with them until there's a problem?
When you're new, it's hard because you only have X number of dollars to work with. It's hard to diversify your supply chain. So you're having multiple manufacturers doing the same thing in parallel. Once somebody has a track record of delivering, close to the mark, and you've had that conversation and they're receptive to the conversation about communication, that's when you want to keep someone around. But there are definitely suppliers that I and companies I've worked with have stopped working with because they may have had a good price, they may be good folks, but if you go to ground, like if you stop answering emails in that last week or 10 days before a product is due, I can't deal with that. We all have other things to do than chase somebody who's supposed to be doing their job, and it's seriously, it's a 5-minute email.
Yeah. Have you found that there are things on your end that have reduced problems on the manufacturing side, or things that you've found that some manufacturers do that reduce these problems?
Being clear with expectations is the main one. Creating good drawings is an undervalued skill. You can have the best design in the world, but if you don't understand how tolerances stack up, every mechanical part has some variance in it, and sometimes they're extremely small. Modern CNC machines are very consistent. Injection molding machines, once a mold is built, the parts are extremely consistent. But understanding, especially when you have several parts going together, how those tolerances affect one another, and the parts they interact with, and knowing what parts, what dimensions, what measurements are important, and identifying them, so that the supplier can do their in-house inspections, is hugely important. Like, if you over-specify, call out tolerances that are too tight, you won't be able to build a part for a price that somebody will pay. You'll price yourself out of the game. I'm just because I have a remote sitting on my desk in front of me, I'm looking at the lever shape. And if you think about the outline of a shift lever, or that can vary 10 thousandths of an inch, 25 thousandths of an inch, without anybody knowing or caring. It's not a critical dimension. That said, the cable clamping feature, we have a screw that actually clamps the cable that actuates the C-post, which this lever works with, is extremely critical, and it requires very low torque. So calling that out and describing that precisely and inspecting those when they come in to make sure that they're within the expected range. Those identifying the critical dimensions and inspecting them, and letting suppliers know that you'll be inspecting. These are the things that I will be inspecting. The others, do your best effort, but it's a rough shape. If it looks okay, nobody's going to care if it's a 1/10 of a millimeter oversized or undersized.
Right on. Well, Mark, I appreciate your time, and this is a great talk.
Thank you, Tyler. Appreciate it, and you have a good afternoon.
Yeah, you too. Thanks for tuning in to the very first episode of the Build Cycle podcast. Two of the things that stood out for me in this conversation were the path that Mark took to go from concept to a product that's for sale. He leveraged his design expertise to get it into the marketplace without having to worry about the manufacturing process himself. The other thing was the difference between design for use and design for manufacturing. There's a big difference between making something that's beautiful and easy to use and actually being able to have it produced. And we'll explore that topic more in a future episode. Be sure to subscribe to the Build Cycle podcast on iTunes or Stitcher, and join our email list for more information, tips, and tactics. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at The Build Cycle. For show notes, links to some of the things we talked about, and more, head to this podcast's blog post on thebuildcycle.com. Until next time, enjoy the ride.